Do I look hot? Man, it's hot. It's like the heat came back. I kind of thought we were done with it for the year, but apparently not. I made a video last night, and I wanted to touch on a couple of points from that video. I made it late at night, so I did entitle it Late Night Plea or something like that. And I wasn't actually going to make a video for a while, partially because I just actually had another really nasty migraine while I was away for the weekend. Flew to another province, went to see my daughter, see her perform. I was looking after my mom while we were there. Not looking after, but I mean, she came with me and I did all the driving and navigating and everything. And obviously I was taking on more pressure than I thought. I didn't feel stressed, but we were navigating our way back to the airport and I could feel some migraine symptoms coming on, some vision artifacting, and the roof of my mouth was going numb. And I fought it off. I'm like, this can't happen now. This can't happen now. And no sooner did we get to the underground parking for the rental car and get out of the car, and my sort of responsibilities were finished, it was meltdown time. My hands started going numb. I could feel the full-on effects coming. I couldn't see straight. And I had to tell my mom, hey, listen, I think I'm getting a migraine. And so here's where my boarding pass is. Here's where my ID is, because when I get my migraines, I get very confused. I can't think properly. It's quite scary. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to operate my phone or do any of the things that I need to do in the airport once the migraine full on hit. And it was the most uncomfortable 5 hours that I've ever spent in an airport, sitting there with a migraine where I can't see properly, I can't think properly, and I'm just waiting for a damn airplane. So needless to say, it was very uncomfortable. On top of that, our flight ended up being delayed, so we were in there almost an additional extra hour in the airport, and flew home. And my wife came and got me at my mom's house. I had my truck parked there, but I wasn't going to drive home because I'm essentially impaired, and I had to go back and get my truck the next day and whatnot. So that was on Sunday, and so then I saw this video last night and decided to make a video. But I'll be honest, I don't like to make a video right after I've had a migraine because I don't think as clearly. I've got this refractory period. It takes me several days to get my sharpness back, get my focus back. And so I wasn't going to make a video, and then I saw Rand Campbell and Raw and the usual cast of characters making their video about the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, and it ticked me off that they weren't even talking about the people who are affected. So I made the video, and it wasn't my most polished work, obviously, because I'm not still feeling all that well. And I have a couple of comments to make about the video after having watched it and some of the comments that have come down the pike. One is Jeff Heisenberg correctly pointed out that I was not nearly careful enough in my language when it comes to differentiating Christians from this particular group of Christians. And so I want to make it very, very clear. In no way did I mean to say in that video that I think Christians are deeming the Ice Bucket Challenge to be satanic or full of symbolism or anything like that. Did not mean that. I recognize that of all the money raised for the Ice Bucket Challenge, probably the vast majority of it has been raised by people who would self-identify as Christians. So I definitely specifically meant to talk about that particular group, and in no way mean that to be extended out to any other Christians. And Jeff, I appreciate you making that clear to me. The other thing I wanted to talk about is Darren Kern pointed out some of my use of language, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. I should, it's not an excuse, but I am still in my refractory period, so I'm not going to use, the best of language at times here now. I'm also not a college graduate, right? I'm a vocational school guy. Not that that's an excuse either, but I don't have the education that some of you may have. I don't mind having my language corrected. In fact, in my life, I'm usually the guy doing the correcting, and I would rather not continually use a word that is wrong. However, there's a way to do it. And Darren, I'm going to pick on you a little bit here because this is kind of indicative to me. Now, maybe you meant it more of a rib-poking way, and this is just what's sort of lost in the translation when we make text comments. But it seemed to me a little bit elitist and a little bit snide and a little bit impatient, I guess is the word I would use, because you at one point in your correction of my use of the words, I think the word you're using is sigh in bold, and then staccato symbolism, symbolism, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but it just seemed to me like there was a little bit of elitism in there and a little bit of impatience. And I see this a lot, so I'm not just meaning to pick on Darren here. I see this a lot, and I don't have a problem correcting people when I think they're wrong and just maybe, gently pointing someone in the right direction in a good-natured way. I also can understand it can get a little bit frustrating if someone continually does something that bothers you. So if you were to have to continually remind someone they're using a word incorrectly, or they're using a definition, they're using a word that the definition doesn't fit, what they're trying to portray, you might get to that point. But I don't think Darren and I are there. And it's just something I see quite often. And I think we're all capable of doing it too, of making errors. So I would just ask people to just think a little bit about being on the receiving end of a correction like that and what it kind of feels like. And just to remember, hey, you don't have to watch my videos either. So, don't get all bent out of shape. And again, here we go off the direction of ALS. And that kind of bugs me on a video like this, where I'm trying to make a point about the people who are afflicted with this disease. The final thing I want to mention is about symbolism itself. And I see my wife's coming home, so I'm going to continue this video in a short while. Hey, it's me again. Talking about my refractory period, I would just say on this part of the video, I would be embarrassed for you to know how many outtakes I've had so far. That's one thing that's definitely impacted. And the other thing that's impacted is just being able to get my thoughts and feelings across and make a coherent point. And after listening to my last video, again, a point that I was trying to make towards the end of the video is something that really didn't come off very well. And that was that even if the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge was somehow prompted by the global elites for some nefarious purposes, it has successfully been co-opted by good-intentioned people on behalf of the less fortunate. So in that instance, I really don't care, right? Even a bad movement successfully co-opted for the good, net good. The other thing I wanted to talk about before I close out this video is the symbolism itself. And this is something that was kind of obvious by the group of Christians who were talking in the video that I was referring to. Because on the one hand, they said the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge was kind of an insult to baptism. And then on the other hand, they were saying that it was sort of like death symbolism, because when you're dead, you're really cold. Well, it's kind of probably got to be one or the other, because they're kind of different things. And someone had commented on my video with what I thought was a really good comment. I'll read it for you now. Chaos VII said, "No culture has a monopoly on what actions symbolize, and projecting mystical meanings onto the actions of a group of people in a direct contradiction to what those people say they are doing is very clearly a self-serving reinforcement of their own assumptions as to what those things must mean." This reminds me of the talking heads on the O'Reilly Factor complaining about how the lyrics of Oppa Gangnam Style were meaningless, without even consulting an English translation of the language the song mostly consists of. Some people actively avoid context so that they can presume their own feelings about what they sense and never feel compelled to consider the possibility of having presumed too much. And I think that's happening here. That comment only has a single thumbs up. And that is a crime, because that is an awesome comment. And of course, it was something that I was thinking about later on today with regards to this symbolism, because of course, the symbolism is a language of its own. Language is all about mutual understanding and intent. And so to try to imagine what something symbolizes, you would have to know the intent of the people who are engaging in displaying the symbolism. That would mean you'd have to actually make an attempt to understand other people and to understand whether or not they even actively meant to symbolize anything other than goodwill and the intent to help other people with a terrible disease, or anything for that matter. And this is something you see quite often. I mean, I think what we end up with is this sort of great sucking sound that is confirmation bias. And that's what that commenter was alluding to. And I see this quite often with that particular crowd. And not to harp on Raw and Ran and these guys, but they do this a lot. Something we also see quite often with the end times predictions and the prophecies. Sort of a weeding out of all the sense data that maybe is not consistent with the conclusion, and a selection and highlighting of all the sense data that matches with a conclusion that we're already sort of pre-programmed, kind of happy with. It matches what we want to portray. And this is, I think, a lot of why, when it comes to things like this, there wasn't a quick Google search done on part of any of these parties. You know, I get in my Google Plus feed and my Facebook feed, my personal one, quite often a lot of conspiracy theories and even the old wives' tales and the urban legends. And I'm very quick to double check all this stuff, to try to fact check these things, because I really just would like to know what's true. I'm not all that concerned about a lot of conjecture and a lot of imaginings and a lot of erroneous connections between things that don't really connect. I think it's often when a person has an idea, pet theory, conclusion that they feel the need to protect, that it can be dangerous to do too much research so as to ramp up the dissonance between their erroneous conclusion and the facts on the ground. And again, when it comes to symbols, it's important to note that you can't really assess any symbol without identifying the sort of language being spoken and the intent of the parties that are portraying this symbol. I think it was a great comment left under my video that said, nobody really owns symbols. This is a language that we agree upon, and different groups of people have different symbols. And so it's really important to identify the language and the intent behind it before you go ascribing meaning to what you perceive to be symbols where they may not be symbols whatsoever. For instance, if I do this, it really doesn't mean anything because I have no intent behind it. I'm just copying something that somebody else has done, that I've seen before, but I have no intent behind it. I'm not trying to communicate anything, so therefore it is meaningless. This, on the other hand, has meaning. I know it's hard to hear, but we can remedy that. Thanks for watching.